So here are my materials for finishing this pillow. I of course have my cross-stitched piece. I have a piece of light interfacing. This is Heat and Bond, but there are lots of different manufacturers out there. It's fusible on just the one side, the rougher side. I have my backing fabric, and I have my template. Now you can see there are a lot of lines here, and one of my tests is to see how well this frames it. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut the inner red line so that this center part here is essentially punched out, and I can make sure that it's framing my egg the way I want it to. So let's cut that out. Just gonna poke a hole with my scissors, get up to that line, and cut all the way around. All right, with that cut, the moment of truth. That is pretty good. Now I want there to be a little bit of border with my pillow, so this was my estimate for where the stitches came to. So it's pretty close. It's a little off here in this section. This could be a little bit narrower, but it's going to be fine. I like the proportion of that egg. So part of the reason there are so many lines on this piece of cardstock, that's what I printed it onto, was so that I could then determine how much of a margin I wanted around the cross-stitched part of the pillow. And this first green line is 1/4 of an inch, and then I have a blue dashed line which is 1/2 inch from where this original red was. And I think that's going to be a little too much. I think I just want this 1/4 of an inch. So this is going to end up being the stitching line, this green dashed line, and that means that my green solid line is the cut line. So out of the cardstock, I'm going to go ahead and cut all along this solid green line. This gives me 1/4 of an inch. At least I think it's 1/4 of it. It might be 3/8 of an inch. It's going to be fine, because even if my stitching line ends up being a little bit further out, I don't want it as far out as this blue line, but it would probably be somewhere in between. Or I can go ahead and, well, I'm going to figure it out. When I release this pattern, this will be a printable, and it will all make more sense, and I will have fixed all of the color coding for the lines. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut on the solid green line. All right. So that is going to give me what I'm going to cut out. Now, before I cut anything though, set that aside, I'm going to go ahead and fuse my fusible interfacing onto the back of my piece. That's crucial. Make sure it's on the back. So let me take this over to the iron, give it a press. I've already pressed out the wrinkles best I can. There's still a bit of a fold, but I think that'll be fine. And I'm going to go ahead and press that. I'll be right back. All right, I have pressed that all into place. I didn't worry about this part since it's getting cut off, but all around the stitching is done, and just double checking, looks pretty good. All right, now I'm going to take my template, and it's nice with that center part cut out, I can frame my egg exactly. And then I'm going to use my air erasable pen here and draw all around the outside. You could use a pencil. I'm drawing right onto the interfacing. I could use little weights to hold this down and then I wouldn't have to worry about it shifting, but you know, I want to get it done. I'm excited. All right. So I have outlined, and this is where I'm going to cut. So I'm just going to use my scissors. If these were nice straight lines, I'd use my rotary cutter, but you know, they're curvy. Right, set that aside. So now we have the front of our piece. And the next thing I want to do is make sure that there's no stray dog hair or threads on that. And I probably should have done that to the back. So little lesson there, making sure that everything is, you don't have any stray threads there. I think I'm okay though. It's pretty good. All right. Let me get my lint roller. And of course, be careful because it is picking up a little bit of those edges there. So roll lightly. All right, I'm going to set that aside for a moment, and we're going to get our back prepared. So I have quite a bit of yardage of this. I'm also a quilter, so I have quite the stash. And I'm going to go ahead and cut a width of fabric that will be wide enough to encompass the egg. And I'm actually going to cut it just a little bit wider. And just cut that strip off. Move my egg out of the way. All right, and then from this strip, I'm just going to go ahead and cut off a piece that is big enough. Actually, I'm going to make it a little bit longer, and I'll show you why in just a moment. So maybe about 2 inches longer. I've left a little extra there because the selvage is at that end. All right. Now, I've watched several YouTube videos, quite a number of them, and I will put up on the screen and also link in the description below a couple of the videos that I watched that really had some fantastic tips. So even though I am passing along these tips, I would recommend checking out some of these other videos because they are the original. So of course, to stuff the pillow, you have to leave a little opening. And oftentimes that opening is left like at the bottom or the side of the pillow, which is great when it's on a straight edge. There are no straight edges here. So this little tip is even more valuable, and you can do that. You can do this using like a rectangular or square pillow, but it's perfect for this. And that is, I want my little slit to, in this case, be kind of lower down on the pillow. So about this far down. And I'm just going to go ahead. It doesn't have to be exact. So, and I'm just going to cut it there. I'm going to cut it down a little bit lower. All right, now you might be thinking, my gosh, you've just cut your backing in half. Yes, I did. And I am going to take and sew these two pieces together, but I am going to leave a gap. Now, I don't want to leave a gap so big that it, it's going to be beyond the edges of the pillow. So in this case, about 3 inches is going to be good. And just to make sure that I don't forget, I'm going to go ahead and mark those 3 inches. And they're roughly in the center. Exactness does not count here. For this, I'm going to use a 1/2 inch seam, which is why I gave myself quite a bit extra up there. And that is because when I go to sew this little gap, after the pillow is all stuffed, I want enough of the fabric to be turned under. If I did a 1/4 inch seam, it kind of wants to keep popping like this, but a 1/2 inch seam really gives me some area to keep that fabric tucked in. You'll see what I mean in a little bit. Let me go sew this. I'll be right back. Okay, I am back with my fabric. Let me show you the back side of it. I've pressed my seam open. Here is the little slit that will get hand sewn after we stuff our egg. So now we're going to put right sides together. And I am going to go ahead and sew about 1/4 of an inch from my cut line of my egg. And I can sew that all the way around. I'll be right back. By the way, I am using matching thread. So I've picked out a gray-blue thread that is the perfect color to be invisible. All right, I have sewn all the way around. And a little hint on the egg, if you start in this area here where it's a very, very slight curve as opposed to maybe the top or even down here at the edges, then as you come back around, it's a little easier to be able to stitch right over where you started. So I have stitched all the way around, and now I'm going to go ahead and trim my backing fabric. And I ended up stitching a little over 1/4 of an inch, about 3/8 of an inch. All right, so we have our little pocket. We'll be able to turn it. Because this has curves, I am going to go ahead and give a few little clips around these tighter curves here. That'll just help it to even out the curve, and it won't cause any issues. So that's pretty good there. Maybe a couple of clips along here. I'm being very careful not to stitch or not to clip right up to the stitching, but to stay a little bit away from it. This just helps when you go to turn it out to keep those curves nice and crisp. All right, I think that'll do it. Time to turn it right side out. Now, as I'm turning it out, I'm going to go ahead and just run my fingers right up along that seam so I can make sure to get it all the way out to the edge. And that's where that clipping comes in handy, because it allows the pieces of the seam to overlap and get that nice even curve. Right. There we go. So before I start stuffing it, I'm just going to double check. I might take a blunt knitting needle, like a very large knitting needle, and just run that around to really get those edges all the way out. And then I'm going to give it a little bit of a press, and then we'll start stuffing. All right, let me grab my fiber fill. All right, I'm going to start with a nice bunch of fiber fill and at the top of the egg. So just press that in there. And then I like to take my fingers and just really manipulate it right up along the seams there. I like a fairly firm pillow, so I'm going to stuff quite a bit in there and really keep tugging at it to get it right up along those edges. So I want them to be as smooth as possible. Go ahead and put a little bit in the bottom here, and then I'll keep manipulating it till I get it as firm as I would like. All right, so I have stuffed my pillow. Looks like a little ham. But you know, getting these curves to be perfectly smooth, well, I've done my very best. I entrusted my handy dull pointed knitting needle. So it's a large, this is a US 11 size knitting needle. So I know it won't be poking through the seams because the point is not super pointy. And I went in from the back and I really tried to push into those areas where it wanted to kind of tuck in. And I think I've gotten them to the best point that I can. So it is firm, still squishy, of course. And I have tried to get all of the stuffing out to the very edges the best that I could. So now I am going to take some thread. I'm going to use the same grayish blue sewing thread, and I am going to stitch the back of this closed. And I am going to use, I believe it's called a ladder stitch, and that will allow me to pull. And I am going to double my thread. So when I sewed this seam, I made sure to back stitch on either side of this gap because I knew that it was going to get a lot of work there. And I'm going to start my ladder stitch actually just past the gap into the seam area to really help keep that closed. So I'm going to readjust the camera so that you can see me sew that together. All right, so I have threaded my needle with the matching thread, and I am going to bury my knot by coming back here, right in the seam. And that should bury the knot. And then I am going to come from underneath and just catch the edge of that fabric. First on one side, then come over onto the other side. And again, I'm just catching the edge of the fabric. I am coming from behind and get the fiber fill out of the way. There we go. It's just a little bit of a stitch, and you'll see in a moment it'll start to pull it together. So and I'm keeping my stitches fairly close. In other words, I'm not coming way down here for the next stitch. So about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit less. And after I've done a few stitches, I'm going to go ahead and give it a good pull. It'll loosen back up a little bit, but the stitches back here will get tighter, and that's what is key. So again, I'm coming from underneath the fold, coming right out, take a couple of stitches, give it a tug, it starts to zipper it right up. All right, I am right to the very edge here. I'm going to go right next to my machine stitching and pulling that really tight. You can see it's not totally invisible. I think one can feel it more than see it, but it's not too bad. And again, making sure that it's pulled really tight. If there's any places where I think it needs to be a little tighter, I can go in. I'm using the eye end of the needle. All right, so to knot this off, I'm going to go ahead and make just a tiny little stitch to really anchor right there. And I can go ahead and put a knot fairly close. It's not totally right there, but I've already anchored, so that really shouldn't move. And then I can go down, take a big stitch off to here. There we go. Let's pop that knot through and then trim. I'm going to give my thread a little bit of a tug. Trim fairly close, and that'll pop back into the inside of the egg. And here we have the finished pillow. So I'm pretty pleased at how it turned out for my first shaped pillow with cross stitch. And of course, this is one of my first cross stitch patterns that I designed. Some of the motifs on this egg are from the 16th and 17th century, from pattern books that were out at that time. So on some of them, I have taken them how they are. Some I have reversed. For instance, this band here and this band, I have reversed where the stitching is, because that way it gives a little bit more band of color. And then I have modified this motif with the smaller flowers here to balance out the design. This motif is a separate motif, but it uses the same little floral motif, but I found them in two different places. Interesting. So this was a lot of fun to stitch. I did learn a lot in stitching this, mostly that I did not use the fancy floss to its advantage because I folded it over, and so I didn't keep the light areas together. I should have used 2 strands pulled and not 1 strand folded. But there is a little bit of variation. You can kind of see some down here at the bottom. Overall though, I really like it, and I think it'll make a lovely Easter decoration. If you would like to stitch this project, I will have the pattern coming out soon. Best way to know when it's available? Sign up for my cross stitch email list. You will be among the first to know when the pattern is available. The link is in the description below. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that you will undertake making a shaped pillow. This is a fairly easy shape. It's nice and oval. I know there are many more complicated ones. That's all for today. So I'm Stacy of Stacy Creates Stuff. I hope you have a very stitchy day. Bye.